It is time. So I'd like to say hello to all of the listeners out there. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an associate editor for Hoard's Dairyman magazine. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It is my pleasure to co-host the webinar with Mike Hutchins, who comes to us from the University of Illinois. We are fortunate to have another top-notch speaker here with us this month. His name is Bill Weiss, and he's from the Ohio State University. His presentation is titled Cutting Feed Costs Without Cutting Milk. Feed is a big expense on any dairy farm, and when milk prices are depressed like they have been for the last couple of years, opportunities to reduce those costs without sacrificing milk is something that could benefit any farm. We really look forward to what Dr. Weiss has to say on that topic. I want to let you know that this month's webinar is sponsored by QLF, Quality Liquid Feeds. We are very pleased to have their support for this program and appreciate their help in allowing us to provide this information to you. I would like to thank our other team members who work behind the scenes to make sure everything runs smoothly every month. That would include Jim Baltz at the University of Illinois and our Hoards Dairyman online media manager, Patty Hirchin. For those of you that are listening to the presentation live, and we have a good group on board today, I want to let you know that you have access to the presentation PDFs. If you go to the GoToWebinar control panel and look down towards the bottom, there's a section that says handouts, and there you can click on the links and get a copy of the handouts to print out to use for future reference or to take notes on. That's something that is available to our live attendees only. Mike, now, if you would be so kind, please go ahead and further introduce our speaker and kickstart this month's webinar.
Well, very good, Abby. It's my professional and personal honor to introduce a great friend and coworker, Dr. Bill Weiss. Bill, as you indicate, works at the Ohio State University, and he earned his bachelor's and master's degree at Purdue and his PhD at the Ohio State. He was born in Minnesota, and worked part-time, just a short stint in North Dakota, and on a joint research extension appointment up there as well. Bill is no stranger to all of us online here. He's very popular here on the Hoards Dairyman webinar series. He has published well in excess of 125 journal articles, 350 popular press articles, and now serves as vice chair of the 2019 Dairy NRC committee, which we heard about is going to be coming out hopefully this coming year. The good news or bad news, Bill, you also were an interim chair in the Department of Animal Sciences for a couple of years as well. So with that, Bill, we'll turn the program over to you and let you discuss the theme today of controlling feed costs. Welcome, Dr. Bill Weiss.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Abby, and greetings from a cloudy Worcester, Ohio. We're going to talk about feed cost control today, and there's several things. Because of the amount of stuff, I can't go into great detail on a lot of these, but we'll at least cover these topics. One, of course, is the ingredients that go into the diet. That has a big effect on cost. Homegrown forage, the appropriate use of those. How you group cows can affect or does affect feed cost. Ration formulation specs. I won't go into great detail on this, but it is terribly important. And then lastly, feed waste and shrink. We're going to start right off with a question or a poll. And so I'm going to turn this back over to Mike to take care of this, and then we'll get back to business.
Okay, we are polling questions here. You can see what are the choices and what is in selecting what will you consider. Number one, in selecting one, you only can pick one for your area. In terms of ingredient selection, which one is cheapest, dollars per ton? Number two choice, what is cheaper in terms of dollars per nutrient supplied? Number three, will it contribute to the diet that produces the most milk? Or fourth, will it contribute to a diet that has the highest income over feed costs? That's what IOFC stands for our international folks. So the polls are now open and we're off and running here. And wow, they're going pretty fast. Abby, are you going to vote on this one?
I will. Yes, Dr. Weiss is putting us to work right away in this presentation. I am going to go with the last choice, the one that combines both the cost of the feed and the milk production. So I'm going with the IOFC income over feed cost choice. Okay. What about you, Mike?
Well, I'm going to go with number 4 also, because I think that's kind of the bottom line right now. Everybody's worried about profitability and margins. So, Jim, let's go ahead and show the poll results here. Jim is showing to it. And Dr. Weiss, any surprises? What do you think of the votes?
It's about what I'd expect. And actually, these answers here, these questions go from the least most correct, the what is cheap is absolutely wrong, to the most correct, which is the highest income over feed cost. The dollars per nutrient supply definitely contributes to that bottom line, but it can't be the only thing you look at. In general, diets that produce more milk usually are more profitable, but at lower milk prices, you have to look carefully at the marginal return. In other words, you might put something in the diet that gets you more milk, but it wasn't profitable. So the bottom one here is the most correct, but the top 2 or the 2 right above that do contribute to the income over feed cost. And we're going to talk a bit about a lot of these things. First thing on ingredient selection, we have to get out of this idea that cows require feed. There is not a corn requirement. There's not an alfalfa requirement. There's an energy, there's a protein, there's a calcium requirement. So we have to start looking at feeds as just packages of nutrients. It's not quite that simple, but we really have to start thinking more of this. What package of nutrients is the best buy? And to do this, there's different methods. I'm going to talk about one, but there's other ones around that work well as well as the one I talk about. First of all, when we compare feeds, it has to be on a nutrient basis. It can't be dollars per pound or dollars per ton. You buy feeds to provide nutrients. Another thing you have to look at is you can't just look at a nutrient. For most feeds provide more than one nutrient. So you can't price corn grain just on as an energy source. You are getting protein from corn. It might not be a lot, but you're getting it. Soybean meal provides protein and energy. So you can't just say soy protein is worth X dollars per pound. You have to price all the nutrients. You have to remember local markets. Even though corn and soy are national commodities, prices differ in markets, and a lot of these byproducts differ in markets. So I'm going to show you some examples, but it's for Central Ohio. It may or may not be applicable to your specific area. And lastly, markets change over time. I'm going to show you very recent data, but in 2 months, this might be wrong. So if you're going to start comparing feed values, remember local markets, and you have to be time specific. The one method we use at Ohio State is a program called Sesame. We run this, or actually Alex Tebby in our department does this every other month. It's available at Buckeye Dairy News, and he writes an article that basically says cost of nutrients. And this is just one software program, but there are others that do essentially, the mechanics may be different, but they do price feeds on multiple nutrients. And so just click on our website, go to Buckeye Dairy News, and then again, Alex writes this article once every 2 months on nutrient cost. And what he does, and again, this is Central Ohio, or it probably could be expanded to all of Ohio in December. So this is hot off the presses. And this program he uses generates an average nutrient cost. This isn't the cost of energy in corn, it's the average cost of energy across multiple feeds. And in December in Ohio, energy was worth about 0.068 cents or 0.68 cents per megacal. Metabolizable protein was worth about 39 cents a pound. Effective fiber was worth about 8 cents a pound. And then this non-effective fiber you'll see is a negative, minus 0.03 cents per pound, or $0.03 per pound. This doesn't mean non-effective NDF has no value. It contributes to energy. But what it's saying is that the market doesn't like high fiber feeds. And that makes sense because chickens and pigs can't use these. So the market basically is discounting high fiber byproducts, which cattle can use. So anyway, you get these nutrient costs, And then you take your feed of interest. I'm just using corn silage as an example. This could be corn gluten feed or distiller grain or alfalfa. This is the nutrient composition of this corn silage. And then so in 1 ton of corn silage dry matter, if you assume it's 0.65 megacals per pound, 1 ton of corn silage dry matter gives you 1,300 megacals. MP at 5% of the dry matter gives you 100 pounds, and so on. So this is the nutrient per pound, per ton on a dry matter basis. And to get the value, the economic value of this, you take the 1,300 megacals per ton times its value, $0.068 per megacal. And so what this is saying is, on average, corn silage has a ton of corn silage dry matter has $88 worth of energy, you see $39 worth of protein, and so on. And you just add that up, and it's saying a ton of corn silage dry matter is worth $175 in nutrients. On an as-fed basis, it's about $60. And you compare that price of the nutrients to what you paid for the feed or what you produce the feed for. If the value of nutrients is greater than production cost or greater than purchasing cost, it's a good buy. If it isn't, you need to think about feeding that. And so you can use this approach. You get these energy values or these dollar values, you get the nutrient composition, and you can make these calculations for any feed and compare nutrient cost to actual cost or purchase cost. And then once a month, Alex does this, and he looks at what he calls bargain feeds. And these are feeds where the nutrient value exceeds the market price. So corn might be $100 a ton, but it provides $150 worth of nutrients or something like that. And in the last month here, these are the feeds that are bargains. They provide more nutrient dollars than what you're paying. And you'll see these top 4, corn grain, corn silage, corn gluten feed, not meal, and distillers are red. They are almost always bargains in central Ohio, almost always. So these are feeds you'd want to try and use if you can, if they fit your diet. If they don't, obviously, you wouldn't include them. Hominy is cheap right now. Whole cottonseed is cheap. So some of these other ones, if they come up as cheap, see if you can make them work. But again, don't put them in a diet, even though they're cheap, if they don't contribute to the nutrients you need. So once a month, he generates this. And then he also generates a table, what he calls overpriced. And that's where the value of these nutrients, MP, net energy, NDF, is less than market price. Alfalfa hay, that's worth, if you just formulate or calculate value on nutrients, you're paying, most people pay for that, pay more than that than what it's worth. But alfalfa has some intrinsic values. Alfalfa hay has some intrinsic values, chewing, things like that. Blood meal is almost always overpriced, but you don't feed blood meal for energy and MP. You often feed blood meal for lysine. That's not calculated. So there's good reason to have blood meal in diets, and that's because it provides lysine. We look here at citrus pulp. In Ohio, citrus pulp is overpriced. If I lived in Florida, likely it would be underpriced. That just shows you local markets. And another example here is molasses is overpriced. But again, you're not going to feed molasses just for energy and protein. You're feeding molasses for sugar, maybe mixability. So the bottom line on these feeds, if they're overpriced, you have to have a reason to put them in. It can't be just for energy and protein. So some overpriced feeds fit quite well because they are providing a nutrient you need in addition to MP, NEL, etc. So these tables are useful just to kind of pick ingredients to look at. But remember, there's other things. We're not perfect on describing feeds. We have these, what I call less quantifiable factors. Variability in composition has a price. When you buy soybean meal, you know what you're getting. It doesn't vary very much. Sometimes when you buy distillers, commodity distillers, you're less certain of what it is. And if you're less certain of the protein concentration or the fat concentration or whatever, you usually have to over-formulate these diets, and that adds cost. So consistent feeds are worth more than inconsistent feeds. Quality, moldy feed, in my opinion, has zero value. I don't care what they sell it for; it has no value. But if it's moldy, what's the value of it to you? Remember, a lot of these pricing systems only price it on fiber, energy, and protein, and there's other reasons to feed. And then lastly, don't forget service and support. Some companies, you buy certain ingredients, will provide additional service, additional support. So look at the value of the nutrients, but it is more complicated than that. But it's a good place to start. Ask yourself on cheap feeds or feeds that are valuable or bargain, can I make these work? And on overpriced feeds, just ask yourself, why are they in the diet? If you have a good reason, they may not be overpriced. Okay, we're going to switch now into feed additives. Feed additives can be quite profitable or they cannot. So I've got 4 questions here, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Well, here we go. This will be exciting. Which feed additive is the best investment based on realistic prices? And boy, we got some interesting choices here. The first one is costs a nickel, 5 cents. If it works, it will net about 15 cents, but it works 75% of the time. Choice number 2, costs 30 cents. If it works, you end up making 70 cents. It works 25% of the time. Number 3, costs 10 cents, a dime. Nets you about 4 cents and almost works all the time. And then the 4th one is the one that comes with the nicest cap. So we'll be off and running here. And Abby, what are you going to do here, young lady?
This one includes a little bit of math for everyone's brains today. I think I'm going to go with what Dr. Weiss was talking about, consistently working products when he was talking about ingredients. So I'm going to use that same thought process for the additives here and go with the 3rd choice. It costs 10 cents, net 4 cents, but almost always works. What do you think, Mike?
I'm thinking about that Illinois cap. I see a picture of the Illinois cap.
I see. Sucking up to you, I think.
Very intriguing for me. So I was voting. I might be biased on that, but I can't highlight the cap. But I guess, Abby, I would agree with you as well. And second of all, 30 cents is a lot of money. So I'm not sure we'll leave Dr. Weiss talk about that. So we're going to close the poll. We got plenty of time. We got a good vote in here. And here are the results, Dr. Weiss. Wow, we got a lot of different votes here. What do you think?
I think the first and the third one are the right answers. And this is the kind of question that professors love and students hate, because in the real world, I would say justify your answer. The third one here, the cost 10 cents and always works, to me is a no-brainer. You're not going to get rich using it, but it's profitable. If you make 4 cents on it, it's worth doing, and you always get that. The tricky part is the first and the second one. This has to do with risk. The first one here that costs 5 cents nets you 15 cents. 3 out of 4 farms or 3 out of 4 pens will show a profit. 1 out of 4 of those is going to lose 15 or lose 5 cents a day. And that's not a lot. And that's, to me, would be, if your risk tolerance is such, this would be a good deal. I wouldn't hesitate to do that now. The second one here is one that is really dicey, and that is it has a huge return if it works. But 3 out of the 4 farms that try this are going to spend 30 cents and not make a dime. Something like this, to me, I would have to be able to evaluate it on farm. Can I feed it for a couple weeks, look at milk production, take it out, and really see if it's working? Because I would not do this without some proof that it's working for my particular farm. So if it always works and is profitable, you should really think about it. If it works most of the time and has a pretty good return, to me, that's worth the risk. High returns with low probability of working, you have to be able to evaluate it on the farm. And with feed additives, a few things you'd ask. I'm not going to go into specific additives because we simply don't have the time. But first question is, what's it supposed to do? A lot of these companies will provide you data. It modifies the room and so and so. And then proof. Does it work? And they show you studies preferably refereed journal papers, but even on-farm type things if they're done correctly. But does it work? And to me, this is a critical question, and that's how often does it work? Nothing works 100% of the time. And if they have done enough studies where they can tell you, yeah, we think it works 3/4 of the time or half the time or 80% of the time, this really helps make a decision. If they don't know, how often it works, that is a problem. And then lastly, of course, the return on investment. And I want to also emphasize this is look at the studies and what animals did they use. And this may help you answer this question, how often it works. If the studies are mostly with fresh cows and it works, but when they did it with mid-lactation cows, it didn't, that's telling you concentrate this additive in the early lactation period. If it works at fresh cows or whatever. But if you can target feed additives, they're usually more profitable. So ask them, what type of animal was it fed to? How often was it successful? But again, this how often it works to me is a critical piece of information and makes decision making a lot easier. Okay, switching gears here on homegrown forages. A few things to always remember is almost always true. One, good corn silage is almost always a cheap source of nutrients. Midwest, West, East, it's just very consistently a good economic source of energy, protein, and fiber. And I want to emphasize good. If it's been chopped way too mature, it's moldy, et cetera, it's not. But good silage is a good source of nutrients. And then the second thing on alfalfa, and this is probably more Midwest centric, but homegrown alfalfa silage is almost always reasonably priced. It may not be a bargain, but it's reasonably priced. And I want to talk a bit about alfalfa here in the next few slides. And again, I just want to emphasize this, that forages can be a cheap source of nutrients, an economical source of nutrients, but they have to be good. Low quality forage, no matter what the price is, will cost you milk and not be a good buy. Okay, so with alfalfa, I want to concentrate on this because it's a little more complicated than corn. It's if you're growing it yourself, the big question is quality versus quantity. They are inversely related. High yields usually equals lower quality because you get the higher yields from delaying harvest, and as crops mature, they go down. So on another poll question here, I want to just make a definition before I turn it over to Mike. I'm defining average alfalfa as alfalfa with 44% NDF. Good alfalfa is 40, and great alfalfa is 36. So Mike, I'll let you take it over from here.
Wow, this is going to be exciting to see. You're going to scratch your heads. You Democrats, Republicans, get thinking here. There are four choices. The first one is 3-cut, higher yield, average quality, versus 4 cuts of good quality. That's one choice. Another choice is a 3-cut, high yield, average quality, versus 4-cut, good and great quality. So there's a quality differential there on number 2, varies. Number 3. At 10% of the dry matter, great alfalfa hay versus good alfalfa hay. That'd be your third choice. And the fourth one, which is probably the easiest one to understand, is betting on the Huskers that they from Washington will beat the Ohio State Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl. And to me, that's the easiest one to understand, Bill. But we'll move on. So the polls are now open, and we got 21% of the vote in, and we've been at it for about a minute, although that included your time as well. So we'll give them about another 25 seconds and see if we can get a few more votes. They're slower coming in. Abby, we'll put you on the spot. I think this is a really tough question. Which one are you going to go with?
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it's tough. I'll be interested to hear what Dr. Weiss says. I'm going to pick the second option with the 4 cuts, good yield, great quality. What would you pick, Mike?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to listen to what Dr. Weiss has to say. So I'm going to go with number 3, saying that, if it's only going to be 10% of the diet, I'm going to really go for the really great alfalfa and put it in there versus the good hay. And I think I struggle, Bill, with that verse thing. I'm trying to figure out, I assume the choice is the first one is what I'm really voting for, not the verse one. But anyway, that's my bias at this point. Let's close this off. We don't lose too much time. And interesting answers. They're all over.
Well, this is complicated. I'm going to discuss each of these in the next few slides. So I won't give the answers right now. But again, it's basically arguing quality versus quantity. And these are hard things to decide. But like I said, I will go into each of these right now. We looked at this a few years ago, and I've updated the price, but the assumptions were done back in 2012, but I have updated everything. And to show you my assumptions, I'm assuming if you cut 4 times, you're going to get 6 tons of dry matter. That's based on some plot data out of Worcester. But if you cut 3 times, based on data out of Wisconsin, yields are expected to be 15 to 20% more. So my assumption is a 3-cut system will give you 15 or 20% higher yield. I took production costs from our budgets, which I think are reasonable for the Midwest. And then I had to price the feed that you grew. And I'm doing this based on expected NDF, based on what I just showed you earlier, protein, NEL. And we also price milk production into this. We know that higher NDF alfalfas produce less milk. So that's also built in. But again, these aren't market prices. These are prices of nutrients adjusted for milk. So these are my assumptions. And again, I'm assuming if I do 3 cuts, I'm always going to get just average quality alfalfa. Not great, not terrible, just average. Every cutting, 44%. With a 4-cut system, I made a few different scenarios here. One is that I'm going to get 3 of the 4 cuttings are going to be good, 40% NDF, but 1 cutting, I'm going to have rain or whatever I couldn't get out, and it's going to be just average. So 3/4 of the hay or the silage is going to be good. 1/4 of it is just going to be average. So that's scenario 1. Second scenario is I'm going to get all 4 cuttings are going to be good stuff, 40% NDF. And then the last one here is 3 of the cuttings are going to be good, 40% NDF, and 1 of them is going to be really good. So 36% NDF. So again, all is good quality. A here is mostly good, some average, and C is mostly good with some very good. And how did this price out? Well, I took a 15% increase in yield and a 20%. So that's, again, based on the data from Wisconsin, a 3-cut system should give you 15 to 20% more yield. And if we look here at A, which again is got the 3 cuttings of good alfalfa and 1 cutting of average, the 3-cut is always more profitable, regardless of yield. So if what this is saying is if you can just get good or average quality alfalfa, good and average quality alfalfa, a 3-cut system is probably more profitable if you get 15 to 20% more yield. On the other hand, if you consistently get good quality alfalfa with a 4-cut system, if all you get is a 15% yield, it's a break even, doesn't really matter. If you get a 20% yield advantage to the 3-cut system, there's a little bit of an advantage to the quantity or the yield over quality. But basically what this is saying is if you always get your alfalfa with 40% NDF, the 4-cut system, 3-cut is probably about break even. But when we look here at where you're harvesting always good alfalfa and sometimes great alfalfa with the 4-cut system, then the 4-cut system always is profitable or always more profitable than the 3-cut system. So the bottom line is yield beats okay quality, but great quality beats yield. So if you're good, you're consistently get great alfalfa, go for the more cuttings, less yield. If weather and other things dictate average quality alfalfa, probably go with yield rather than quality. Then the other question I asked there was, at these low inclusion rates, is the high quality, which presumably is going to cost more than okay quality, is it worth it? And we need to remember here is, in the vast majority of studies showing the effect of alfalfa quality on milk production, is where alfalfa is a predominant part of the diet, 30, 40, 50% of the diet. We are getting now many, many diets have this magic 5 pounds of hay in it, 10% or less. Does quality matter that much? And there's surprisingly very, very little data looking at this question. To me, it's a very important question. Because again, at low inclusion rates, can I buy cheaper alfalfa and still get milk production? And I could only find one study to look at this. And they had alfalfa at 39 versus 43, fed at about 15% of the diet. They had no effect on intake or dry matter. Whereas if this was at 30 or 40% of the diet, we'd expect 3 or 4 pounds more milk from the 39% alfalfa. But at these lower inclusion rates, the studies found no effect. They also looked at 2 forages, 2 alfalfas with different in vitro fiber digestion, 43, which is below average, 50, which is above. They found no effect. And again, if we fed these at a higher inclusion rate, we would expect upwards to 4 pounds more milk from the higher quality alfalfa, which would value the higher quality alfalfa at about $20 a ton more than the lower quality. But again, this is suggesting at low inclusion rates and 10 or 15% tops, maybe you can get by with average, not junk alfalfa, but average alfalfa rather than prime stuff. So I'd look at low inclusion rates, I'd really look carefully at the differential between great alfalfa and good alfalfa. It might not be worth it at low inclusion. High inclusion, I don't think there's any question it's worth it. The high quality is worth it. Okay, now to change gears one more time on grouping. Grouping, you group cows for lots of reasons. One reason to group cows is to increase income over feed cost. And it can do this if it's done correctly and your nutrition is done correctly. A lot of people group, but then they don't take advantage of that grouping to maximize or to minimize cost. These here are 2 groups that I think are 2 grouping systems that almost always will increase income over feed cost. And that's separate. And I should mention before I go any further is I'm assuming if you can group cows, the cows will be grouped correctly in good facilities and managed correctly. But separating out fresh cows first 3 weeks or so against all other ones, this allows this fresh cow diet to be really expensive because it's only fed for 3 weeks. There's some additives that clearly work in early lactation cows that are expensive, but they clearly work. This would allow you to target. Feeding these fresh cows correctly can have carryover effects, which I'll show you briefly, may increase peaks and so on. So this separation, I think, is quite useful. The other one here is 2-year-old cows versus older cows. And this one, diets, you might not change feed costs one bit because you could actually feed the exact same diet. But there's enough data out there showing that separating out 2-year-olds increases lifetime production. So you're not really reducing feed costs, you're increasing production, but the net is the same. You're going to increase income over feed costs. So these are 2 systems to really think about. This is a study we did a year ago, and I don't want to go into great detail on this, but we fed diets the first 21 days, 16.5% protein, 18.5%, or 17.5 plus amino acids. And again, these were fed for just the first 3 weeks. And this amino acid diet got us more milk fat, more milk protein during this 3-week period, which is kind of what we expected. But then we put all these cows after 21 days on a common diet and fed those cows for the next 12 or for the next 8 weeks, up to 12 weeks of lactation. But again, at this point, from week 4 through 12, all cows are fed exactly the same diet. And you can notice here that this amino acid treatment, which ended, maintained high milk fat and higher milk protein, significantly more, for the next up to 12 weeks. So I fed an expensive diet for 3 weeks, then a conventional typical diet for the next up to week 12, and I maintained that difference. So again, separating out fresh cows may allow you to feed expensive ingredients, expensive diets, and reap benefits from that well after the diet ceases. The other grouping system here that can increase income over feed cost is grouping by production. But this is one that has to be done correctly. And I see a lot of farmers do this, but then the nutritionist doesn't take advantage of this grouping. By grouping by production, you formulate for each group, which I'll get into in just a minute. It allows you to target additives. Again, a lot of additives work on high-producing cows, tail enders. It doesn't do anything. So grouping will allow you to target additives. And it may, and sometimes this doesn't work, but it may allow you to manage your forage inventory better. The higher quality forage goes to the early lactation cows, lower quality to the late lactations. So you can do all this, but the key here is the diet you formulate for each group. What you do here, this is, let's say you have a 1 group TMR. It's got an average production 80 pounds, doesn't matter. But within that 1 group TMR, you're going to have cows that are very low producing and cows that are very high producing. And we know you cannot balance for the average. You have to balance for above average. And the wider this dispersion, the more you have to overfeed the average cow. So when we group by production, I'm just using an example here of 3 production groups, you're going to get 3 different means, but the mean of those means will be the same as the 1 group. But what really matters here, what saves you money, is not the 3 different means. It's the much less variance within, or dispersion within, these diets, within these cows, within these pens. So now, instead of this really, really wide spread within each pen, you've got much, much smaller standard deviations. And that's how you take advantage of grouping cows. And as an example here, we think, and this is again beyond the scope of this webinar, is you should balance diets for protein, metabolizable protein, for about 1 standard deviation above the mean. So if the mean was 75, I'm going to formulate that group for 88 pounds because the standard deviation was 13. When I break it up into 3 groups with much smaller deviations, the low group now is going to be balanced for just 4 pounds above the mean. The mid's 5 pounds above the mean, and the high 6 pounds above the mean based on these standard deviations. So when I break them down into 3 groups, the average diet supports 80 pounds. The average of these 3 diets supports 80 pounds. But with 1 group, I have to formulate a diet that supports 88 pounds. So you save money by grouping, not for the 3 different means. You save money by overfeeding less. So if you're a nutritionist, is overfeeding, when you separate by production, overfeeding the same amount, he needs to balance them tighter. They have to be tighter. As you reduce variation within pens, you still overfeed, but you overfeed less. How many groups? Well, there are costs to grouping. One is labor, more pen moves, management time, feed inventory. So there's cost. But the benefits are lower feed costs, maybe body condition score, and so on. And work out of Wisconsin looked at this, and I'm just going to talk about typical prices here, typical feed, typical milk prices. 2 groups versus 3 production groups. And a 2-group system saves you about $40 and increases income over feed cost $40 compared to 1 group. So it's a huge benefit. A 3-group system saves you another $7.50. So it's profitable, but you've got to think of all the cost, more inventory, more diets, etc. So 3 groups are more profitable, but it's not that much more profitable. And I think in general, 2 diets for most farms, 2 production diets for most farms is adequate, plus a fresh cow group. Again, I want to reemphasize this. You cannot underformulate diets. You do not make money by feeding diets that provide less nutrient than these cows need. So you might have a cheap diet, but you will lose milk. So these diets have to be adequate, and which means you have to overformulate for a pen of cows. And these are two studies here, just emphasizing this. You can see my prices. I'm using bean meal at $3.50, corn at $3.60, milk at $16. And these are two studies here looking at protein. In one study we did, we had a 15% diet and a 17.5. In a study out of Wisconsin, they had about a 15.8 and a 17.1. And I'm not saying cows need 17.5. These are the treatments. But increasing protein got me 6 pounds of milk, but they also ate about 3 pounds more feed. And this diet, the high protein, is clearly more expensive. So in our study, I increased feed costs 72 cents a day, but I increased milk income 96 cents. So I make a quarter here. So feeding extra protein was more expensive, but it paid off. And basically the same result in Wisconsin. They increased feed costs 40 cents. They increased milk income 68 cents. So again, about another quarter. So don't overfeed too much, but don't underfeed either, because underfeeding can be quite expensive. And then I get this question a lot because I do a lot of mineral research, and they say, well, money is really tight. Can I get rid of vitamins and trace minerals for a while? And my answer is no. You can feed less. You can feed to the requirement, but don't take them out. And this study here, based on current prices, it's going to cost you about $35 a year to feed vitamin E and selenium at NRC, dry cow and lactate. But this study here, published a couple years ago, said that feeding adequate selenium and vitamin E gained you $190. So you can take it out and save $35, but you're going to lose $190. So trace minerals and vitamins are needed. They are needed for health. Be reasonable. Don't take them out. And basically, by being reasonable, feed at NRC. A lot of people grossly overfeed minerals, grossly overfeed vitamins. These aren't cheap. So just get them down to where they should be. And the vast majority of research says NRC is adequate. And if you want to put a little cushion in here at 20%, that's fine. But I see diets with 2 and 3 times NRC, and there's no reason for that. So don't pull them out. Just get them down to reasonable levels. Lastly, here is shrink. We all know shrink's expensive. And here you see a massive amount of shrink in this silage. And then you see this pile of concentrate, and all this water is running right through it. And it's probably making the feed moldy, and it's also washing away nutrients. So this is an obvious way to reduce shrink, or an obvious cost to shrink. Wet feeds are often very cheap, and they should be fed if possible. But remember, wet feeds aren't stable. This is wet distillers. If you're buying wet distillers or wet brewers, and after a week or so you see this kind of mold, this shouldn't be fed. You have to throw this away, and you have to price this. It still might be a good deal, but if you have to throw away 20% of what you're buying, factor that into the price. And for these wet feeds, especially in hot months, you're going to have some spoilage. So calculate that in. Very often, it's still cheaper simply to throw this away and buy wet feeds. I'm just saying, make sure you calculate the cost to shrink on these wet feeds. This one is kind of for humor, but it's also show you there's a lot of ways we can waste feed. And this is the wandering Jersey shrink. And again, this doesn't happen often, but just to remind you that there's lots of ways to look. Look around the farm, see where you're losing feed that never gets to an animal. Being blown away, getting wet, not proper feed, not feeding out enough. Lots of ways to reduce shrink. And then this slide, I just love. These are university goats, obviously. You wouldn't want this on your farm. So again, just a little humor, but it's again emphasizing, look around, where are you losing feed before the cow ever eats it? A lot of these things have very little cost to fix, and they have a good return. So remember, shrink, the feed that is wasted costs you exactly the same as the feed that's eaten. And look at ways. And here's just an example. If you purchase a feed at $100 or grow it at $100 a ton, and you lose 15% of that, you're not feeding a $100 feed. You're feeding $118 per ton feed. So that's just like spending 15% more. If you're really bad, or there's very bad situations, 50, your $100 feed now has become $200 feed. So watching shrink, watching waste is a good way just to reduce feed costs, usually relatively simply. Shrink, proper silage making, proper feed out. Make sure you feed enough. We used to say a couple inches of silage a day. Now we think 6 to 12 inches a day to get maximum reduced feed out losses. Hey, correct dry matter when you make it. Use preservatives if necessary, and protect. Commodities under full cover. You know, if they dump a load and half the load's outside exposed to the sun or exposed to the weather, and you're losing a lot of that, calculate that into your cost. Feed bunk management. You know, feeding several times a day might reduce spoilage in the bunk. Pushing up feed, so on. Just proper bunk management. And then on wet feeds, make sure your inventory is appropriate. Wet feeds can be very, very cheap if you don't have a lot of spoilage. So if you can go through and manage inventory, wet feeds, if you can buy them, are usually a good deal. Waybacks. This is essentially waste. I shouldn't say that. It's, you know, you feed 50 pounds of dry matter and you're going to throw out, or you're going to still have a pound or two left in the bunk. We shouldn't look at that as waste, because if cows have an empty bunk, you lose milk. So waybacks the appropriate amount of wayback is critical. You don't want to hurt milk production by limiting feed, but you don't want to throw away this feed. And even if you feed waybacks to heifers, or low cows, you're still losing value. Because of time, I'm not going to go into all the details in last month's Hoards. Mike went into this in great detail. I'd suggest you read it. But tracking or monitoring waybacks, again, can save you a couple % of your feed bill. So to wrap up here, use cost-effective, not necessarily cheap feeds. Feed additives can be very valuable, or they can be a waste of money. So look at return on investment and how often they work, and target them to those groups that will likely respond. Forage is valuable, and it's often an inexpensive or a less expensive source of nutrient. Be aware of the quality, use the appropriate quality based on inclusion rates. Talk to your nutritionist and balance. If you're grouping cows by production, these diets need to be a lot tighter than one group TMRs. You're still going to overfeed. You're just not going to overfeed as much. Shrink. You've heard a lot of this. A lot of people talk about this. Just look at ways around the farm where shrink happens, and can you do something about it? And then lastly, waybacks. I didn't go into great detail. Don't shortchange nutrients. Don't feed to empty, or don't use, or don't have cows suffer from empty bunks. But don't waste a ton of feed. It's expensive, and even if you feed it to another group of cows, you still lose value. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Abby or Mike. Thank you very much.
Well, turn it back.
Oh,
go right ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss, for that presentation. I think nutrition and rations can be pretty confusing and complicated, and you certainly hit on a lot of points there, thinking about forages and other commodity ingredients, additives, the effect of shrink, and how that all plays a role in the price of feed. And I think, the bottom line is being cost effective, but not cheap in your spending of the ration, to really help enhance that milk production that's so important to all our dairy producers. So thanks for covering a wide variety of topics in a short amount of time. I think you did a really tremendous job with that. We had a really great audience, live audience today, a lot of attendees. We appreciate you being a part of our webinar. I want to remind you that the webinar will be available online on our archives next week or later this week. So feel free to check back if you want to watch the presentation again. Also, if you want to share it with anyone else, it's available to anyone online once it's posted. For those of you that are attending, you will get a survey in your email that will ask a few questions about the webinar, and we'd appreciate if you'd provide your feedback. That helps us for future planning. Our sponsor for today was QLF, Quality Liquid Feeds, and we definitely appreciate their support of our webinar. If you want to learn more about them, please check them out online. And then I hope you'll make plans to attend our next webinars, which you'll see on the screen here right now. Kicking off 2019 with a dairy situation and outlook. That will be presented by Mark Stevenson from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Kind of look into his crystal ball and tell us what he expects for the coming year, and hopefully get some good news from him there. That webinar will be sponsored by Chris Hansen. And then moving to the next month, February 11th, 2019, we'll be talking about heat stress. So never too early to think about the hot summer months and how that will impact our cattle. This presentation will specifically be talking about dry housing the calves and how heat stress during the dry period can affect future generations of the herd. That presentation will be given by Jeff Dahl from the University of Florida. We had some questions that came in advance, and then for any of you in attendance, you are able to type questions in to the webinar control panel down in that questions section. So I will turn things over to Mike, who will read the questions for Dr. Weiss, and we'll wait for his answers to them.
Well, we got a bunch of questions here, Bill, so we'll be in the speed round here. The first one comes in, and as Abby points out, you can send questions ahead. This one's from Missouri, and I'll read it to you. You probably can see it there. Everybody can see it. Are there any cost-cutting strategies for the feed in a robotic milking system? Not only are we effectively affecting milk production, but also milk visits in a free-flow system. Comments on that, Bill?
Well, first of all, I need to say that, like Dirty Harry said in the movie, a man has to know his limitations, and this is not my strength. But with a robotic system, one, you basically can balance diets for every single cow in the herd almost, because you'd have a band of protein and a band of energy. So you can really fine-tune protein, which should cut cost. You want to formulate the PMR, the partial mixed diet, under the average. If you're already feeding above average in the TMR or the PMR, you're wasting money. So 10 or 15 pounds less than the average in the group should be in the PMR, and then you make up the difference in the computer feeder or in the robot milker. But you got to be careful on cheap ingredients, because these cows have to eat a lot of feed in a short period of time. So if it's a bad feed they don't like, you're going to lose money. If it's pellet, a poor quality pellet, because it's cheap, it's going to plug up the system. You're not going to get the quality. So I wouldn't shortchange the quality of ingredients and the quality of the pellet, but I would really look at balancing these diets very, very tightly, because again, you are formulating essentially for every specific cow in the herd.
Very good. Here's a fun one for you to think about. Can we only feed wheat straw as the sole forage source as long as all nutrients are being met by, for example, the NRC software or by some model system? I asked this question because you said cows need nutrients, not feed. Any thoughts on if straw is your only forage source and you've got that job done?
That, I should have said one day eventually we're going to just do nutrients, but we're not quite there yet because we can't quite describe everything. But there is studies from, I think, Arizona years ago, where they fed very high straw. It wasn't the only forage, but it was the predominant forage at low levels. So they met the forage NDF requirement, 20, I can't remember exactly, but 20-25% forage NDF. But that would have a very low inclusion rate of straw, and these cows did okay. So I'm going to say we're not quite strictly nutrients. We have this forage quality still is an issue, but with lower quality feeds, lower quality forage, you drop the inclusion rate, maintain appropriate amounts of forage NDF, we can do adequately. I don't think we'll ever do, or we can't right now do as great as we can with really, really good quality forages. But yeah, I think with straw or lower quality forages, drop inclusion rate, maintain forage NDF, total NDF, starch, etc., you can get reasonable production. The key, though, or one key of this stuff is mixability. These straw diets with grain is very dry, and sorting is a problem. And I think that's why the Arizona study put some corn silage in. It just helps mixability. So the answer is we're not quite at a nutrient basis, but yes, you can use lower quality forages if you balance the diets appropriately.
Okay, very good. Here's a fun one. Well, question is on feed additives, and actually it applies to amino acids and inert fats, and that is meta-analysis. How do we find out how often these results are positive with the meta-analysis on any of these feed nutrients that may come into that have meta-analysis out there? Comments on meta-analysis?
If a lot of these meta-analysis, if they're done correctly, will include tables or figures where it basically has all the studies used, and they will show significance or not. So that's one way that I'm making these numbers up totally. It might be 40 studies on them. They show this figure, and in 25 out of the 40, they got a significant difference. So that's available in the better meta-analysis, and they also show even if it wasn't significant, was it positive? Because a lot of times people don't design studies and they're what we call underpowered. So they couldn't detect differences. So these tables or figures where it shows, every single study had a positive response, but 3/4 of them were statistically significant. That gives you good confidence. So look, a lot of these studies, again, if they're done correctly, will provide that information. If they don't, if they just say the average response was 2 pounds or something, I'd probably talk to the authors, talk to the company who sponsors it, see if you can get that information. Because again, I think that's as critical as knowing the average return or the average response.
Another interesting question. How do you work out standard deviation for a group or groups of cows on the farm? Is there a software program available that people could actually put their data in and get that number?
If a farm has individual milk weights, you can put that into Excel. Any of these numbers will give you the standard. There's a formula that in Excel or these spreadsheets that'll calculate standard deviation. So the software, the milk software may actually do it as well, but Excel will do it. But you need individual milk weights. If you get something like DHI once a month and you could import it into an Excel sheet, that would be another way to get, again, it's I think it's just add STD or something very similar to that command. So all these common spreadsheets will calculate standard deviation. The big problem is getting individual cow data. Again, it doesn't have to be every day. DHI monthly data would be fine. If you have connections to DHI, you might ask them if they could do that. If they could modify their records so that for a pen, it would give you it. But right now, I'd say Excel or a similar spreadsheet would be the way to go.
Let me build on that answer and ask you, is there a magic number? We saw with the one group was the standard deviation was 13 pounds. Then you subdotted down to the smaller ones. Is there a number that you say, oh, that's way too big of a standard deviation you need? You should really, if your nutritionist, really look at multiple pens. Is there a magic cutoff?
We're actually trying to look at this right now on very limited data. One group TMRs, again, I want to emphasize very limited data. The average standard deviation is about 16% of the mean. So if you're above that, I'd say definitely. But even at 16%, when you cut this down into two groups based largely on production, you're going to cut that standard deviation by more than half. Not a lot more than half, but by more than half. And so just start thinking of if you're overfeeding by 16 pounds a day or overfeeding by 8 pounds a day, how much difference that would be in especially protein. So 16% right now is my best estimate of average one group TMR, milk production variance. And I think if you're at one group, you will save money by grouping. You will if you reduce the overfeeding.
Back to your sesame examples here. Question is, if you price in everything at market values, is there a risk of overpricing farm-grown forages when using sesame and therefore missing an opportunity to optimize or maximize income over feed costs? So the question is, these market prices going in on on-farm raised forages.
Yeah, the big problem, one of the biggest problems with sesame and other pricing systems, it's not just the sesame, is you need market prices. And for alfalfa hay, we have a market price. For even grass hay or hay, there's market prices. But how do you find a market price for corn silage? And so what we've done in our system is basically price corn silage at the time of harvest based on the price of corn. You can argue whether this is good or bad. The alternative, though, is you should have an idea of production cost. And so you can calculate the cost of nutrients for corn silage and compare it to production cost. It will almost always be cheap. So, yeah, I think for alfalfa, we might be underpricing homegrown forages, corn silage. We really don't know because, again, there's no market price. Hay, we do a decent job. Silage, not so good.
Let's follow up on that sesame point. Could sesame also be run by putting in like sugar or lipids as one of the variables besides the four you listed, or maybe amino acids, for example?
Yes, you can. I'm no expert at using this thing. There's different runs. I know one run has amino acids. There's no reason you couldn't put sugars, etc. You need to know the sugar concentration of all these feeds, though. You can't, if you only know the sugar concentration of molasses, you can't use it. So you have to have the nutrient composition of this basket of feeds, and I think we have 30 feeds in our basket. And then ideally is the other thing it won't do is, or it has trouble doing is sugar is part of energy, fiber is part of energy. A lot of these nutrients are counted twice. So it's difficult to separate the energy price from the price of a nutrient like sugar. So that sometimes you get some goofy answers. So just be aware of that. But yes, you can price it on calcium, on phosphorus, on many things. There is a limit because of computer power, but you can add these things in.
Okay, we have four quick answers, quick hitters, as we'd say. Here we go. I think they want the Bill Weiss theory on this. Here we go. First one is, what about two dry cow groups, one for fat cows, one for normal cows? What's your idea on that for grouping dry cows?
It's probably better than nothing. I'd rather get rid of the fat cows in lactation. You don't want fat cows in the dry period. You can't have them lose too much weight because that's almost as bad as having them calve fat. So you might be able to moderate body condition a bit in the dry period with fat cows. What it would allow me to do is, I'm not going to get too much into specific feed additives, but choline, rumen protected choline in fat cows works quite well. So it would allow you to target higher priced additives to fat cows. And again, you could moderate body condition a little bit, but not a lot.
Number two, free choice minerals. Do cows know what they need? Can we do that and use that as a way of giving minerals to our cows?
I always answer this question by saying humans are smarter than cows, we think, and we do a terrible job of balancing our minerals. No, there's good data showing cows, if they're deficient in salt, for example, they will crave salt. If they're deficient in something, they may crave it and eat it. But cows tend to over-consume free choice minerals, and the average cow, a lot of cows eat below requirement. So no, they can't. I would put it in the TMR. If you're going to feed free choice minerals, make the cow work for it. For instance, salt blocks, I have no issue with those at all. It gives cows something to do. And they have to work to eat. But free choice loose minerals, I think, are expensive, and cows are not smart enough, nor are people, to balance their own diets.
I think bias view, bypass soybean meal versus corn gluten, the 60% protein source. Any biased comments on one or the other?
They're both good feeds, high quality feeds. They differ in amino acids. And so I can't say one is going to be better than the other. In certain situations, one will be better because it's providing different amino acids. So if you're going to feed those products, you're feeding them for metabolizable protein and amino acids. So look at the balance. For example, the corn gluten meal is going to be low in lysine. So if you need lysine, the treated soy might be better. So just look at there's no magic, no good or bad ingredients really. It's diet. So which one will fit in your specific diet? Quality wise, they're both good. It's just corn gluten meal is a lot lower in lysine. It's higher in MP, lower in lysine than the soy products.
Last question has to do with shrink, and I think it relates this from one of our real supporters from Europe, and that is not using upright silos, so it'd be bunkers or piles. What type of shrink, that's how I interpret the question, would be acceptable on that type of storage unit?
Well, when I was in school, we kept hearing bunkers at 10 and 20% shrink. This was just standard. But the technology we have now, the knowledge we have with these films, with the way the bunkers are made, the quick covering, etc., I've seen reports with as little as 3 to 5% shrink in bunkers, which is as good as the best upright. So I'd think with proper silage making skills or techniques, which can cover quick covering, lots of tires, these films, etc., shrinks of 5% to me are very achievable now.
Well, Bill Weiss, just an excellent job here. Thanks for all your fast answers. We appreciate that. And as one of the participants said, a great webinar. So, Abby, we'll turn it back to you to wind up.
Very good. I'll echo Mike's comments. A great job with all those questions and the presentation in general. Dr. Weiss, it's always a pleasure to have you as our presenter. I will look forward to having you again on the docket for 2019. Also want to give one more shout out to QLF, Quality Liquid Feeds, for partnering with us and being the sponsor of this webinar. And we really appreciate their help. Looking forward, here are the future webinar dates listed on the screen. We have the dairy situation and outlook for 2019 in January, and then in February, heat stress effects on dry cows and calves. We really hope that you will consider joining us for one or all of our webinars for next year. Same time, noon Central Time on the second Monday of each month. And as we approach the end of this year, I'd like to take the time to thank all of you for joining us for our 2018 webinars. We really hope these presentations have been useful to you, and we look forward to another great slate of webinar presenters in 2019. From all of us here at Hoards Dairyman and our team at the University of Illinois, I'd like to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone who has been listening to our webinars. We will surely look forward to talking with you again in the coming year.